The old hostel stood at the edge of a dense, foreboding forest, miles away from the nearest town. Its weathered wooden walls and broken windows gave it an eerie, abandoned look. But for three friends, Sarah, Mark, and Jake, it was the perfect place to spend a weekend away from the chaos of their lives. They had found the hostel online, advertised as a quiet retreat for those seeking solitude. The price was too good to pass up, and the photos, though grainy, made it seem charming in a rustic way. The trio arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sound was the distant cawing of crows. The hostel loomed before them, its front door slightly ajar, creaking in the breeze. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with unease. Mark shrugged, hoisting his backpack higher on his shoulders. "It matches the address. Besides, it's just for 2 nights. How bad can it be?" Jake, ever the optimist, grinned. "Come on, it'll be an adventure. Like one of those horror movies, but without the axe murderers." Sarah rolled her eyes but followed them inside. The interior was dimly lit, the only light coming from the fading sunlight filtering through the grimy windows. The air was stale, and the floorboards groaned under their weight. A long hallway stretched before them, lined with doors that led to what they assumed were the rooms. "Hello?" Mark called out, his voice echoing through the empty building. There was no response. "Guess we're on our own," Jake said, pulling out his phone. "No signal, though. Hope they have Wi-Fi." They found a small office near the entrance, its desk covered in dust and cobwebs. A ledger lay open, its pages yellowed with age. Sarah flipped through it, her fingers brushing against names and dates that stopped abruptly over a decade ago. "Creepy," she muttered, closing the book. "Let's just pick a room and settle in." They chose a room at the end of the hallway, its door hanging crookedly on its hinges. Inside were 3 bunk beds, their mattresses thin and stained. The walls were bare except for a single, cracked mirror that reflected their uneasy expressions. As night fell, the hostel grew colder. The friends huddled together, sharing a single flashlight they had brought. The electricity, it seemed, had long since been disconnected. "Maybe this wasn't such a great idea," Sarah said, her breath visible in the cold air. Mark chuckled nervously. "Relax. It's just an old building. Nothing to be scared of." But as the hours passed, the atmosphere grew heavier. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant howl of the wind. Then, around midnight, they heard it. A faint knocking, coming from somewhere deep within the hostel. "Did you hear that?" Jake whispered, his eyes wide. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. "It's probably just the wind." But the knocking grew louder, more insistent. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate, as if someone, or something, was trying to get their attention. "Let's check it out," Mark said, though his voice betrayed his fear. They followed the sound, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The knocking led them to a door at the far end of the building, its surface covered in strange symbols carved into the wood. The air around it was colder, and the knocking stopped the moment they approached. "Should we open it?" Jake asked, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Before anyone could answer, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the basement. A foul smell wafted up from below, making them gag. "Okay, that's it," Sarah said, backing away. "We're leaving. Now." But as they turned to go, the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in the hallway. The flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging them into darkness. The friends fumbled in the dark, their panic rising. The knocking started again, this time from behind the basement door. It was louder now, more urgent, accompanied by a low, guttural growl. "We need to get out of here," Sarah screamed, her voice breaking. Mark grabbed the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked." Jake pulled out his phone, the dim light barely illuminating their faces. "We'll have to find another way out." They stumbled down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The knocking followed them, growing louder with each step. Finally, they found a window, its glass cracked and covered in grime. Mark kicked it open, and they climbed out, falling onto the damp ground below. The night air was a relief, but their ordeal was far from over. As they ran toward the car, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold, a deep, guttural laugh, coming from the hostel. The friends drove to the nearest town, their hands shaking as they recounted their experience to the local sheriff. The man listened in silence, his face growing paler with each word. "That hostel," he said finally, "has been abandoned for over 20 years. No one goes near it." "Why?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. The sheriff hesitated, then sighed. Back in the 90s, a group of travelers stayed there. They were never seen again. The police searched the place but found nothing. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. Just, gone. Mark frowned. "What about the symbols on the door?" The sheriff's expression darkened. "Those symbols are old, older than the hostel itself. Some say they're meant to keep something trapped. Something that shouldn't be let out." Despite their fear, the friends couldn't shake the feeling that they had left something behind. The hostel called to them, its whispers haunting their dreams. They knew they had to go back. Armed with flashlights and a sense of dread, they returned to the hostel. The door was still open, the basement stairs beckoning them downward. As they descended, the air grew colder, the smell of decay stronger. The basement was a maze of dark corridors, the walls lined with strange symbols. And then, they found it, a room, its door covered in chains. The knocking started again, louder than ever. The chains rattled, and the door began to shake. "Whatever's in there," Jake said, his voice trembling, "we can't let it out." But it was too late. The chains snapped, and the door flew open. A figure emerged, its form shifting and twisting, its eyes glowing with malevolent light. The friends screamed, but their voices were drowned out by the creature's roar. It reached for them, its claws slicing through the air. The hostel still stands, its doors locked, its windows dark. But if you listen closely, you can hear it, the knocking, the whispers, the laughter. And if you're foolish enough to enter, you'll find the remains of those who came before, their faces frozen in terror. The creature is still there, waiting for its next victims. And it's always hungry.